Hey, what's going on, party people? Robert Jenkins here, coming to you with another episode of the North Star podcast. In fact, this is episode 5. The title of today's episode, it really comes from the title and the subject matter comes from an article that I read some time ago, actually, on a website called Quillette.com. Quillette, like littlepen.com. Quillette. Now, you're no doubt familiar with that old saying that if the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Everything tends to look like a nail to the person who only has a hammer as their main tool. Well, the article that I read on Quillette some time ago now, a few weeks ago, maybe a couple months ago, the title of that article was "When All You Feel Like Is a Nail, Everything Looks Like a Hammer." Kind of turns that old saying on its head, and it does so because it's what the article is doing is it's describing these radical leftist communities and the mindset of the people in those communities. And I'll read you an excerpt from the article, but I thought it was immensely interesting. But again, the author says that when all you feel like is a nail, everything looks like a hammer. So the author was actually a member of one of these far left communist, anarchist type, socialist type of organizations. And he actually got out of it. And when you read the article, it's like he was getting out of a cult. He had to break his conditioning. I got a poem called "Breaking Our Conditioning." Maybe I'll bring that on air someday. But this guy basically getting out of this commune he had to break his conditioning. Now, an excerpt from that article. He said, "When I became an anarchist, I was 18, depressed, anxious, and ready to save the world. I moved in with other anarchists and worked at a vegetarian co-op cafe. I protested about student tuition, prison privatization, and pipeline extensions. I had a lawyer's numbers sharpied on my ankle, and I assisted friends who were pepper sprayed at demonstrations. I tabled zines," I don't know what that means exactly, "lived with my chosen family, and performed slam poems about the end of the world. While my radical community was deconstructing gender, monogamy, and mental health, we lived and breathed concepts and tools like call-outs, intersectionality, cultural appropriation, trigger warning, safe spaces, privilege theory, and rape culture." He goes on to say, ask, "What is a radical community?" And he says, "For the purposes of this article, I will define it as a community that shares both an ideology of complete dissatisfaction with existing society due to its oppressive nature and a desire to radically alter or destroy that society because it cannot be redeemed by its own means." He says, "I eventually fell out with my own radical community. The ideology and the people within it had left me a burned out, disillusioned wreck. As I deprogrammed, I watched a diluted version of my radical ideology explode out of academia to become fashionable. I watched the left become woke." That's what we're talking about. So I'm going to kind of use that as a jumping off point to discuss a few things that have recently occurred, articles that I've recently read and things that have recently been in the news. And as you know, we on this program, we try to stay away from politics so much. We try to talk about principles over politics. So I'm going to take these events and these things that happened recently, and I'm going to look at them, but I'm going to look at them from the standpoint of the principles. And we're going to deconstruct this whole thing where the guy is talking about when all you feel like is a nail, everything looks like a hammer. That's a part and parcel of this whole being woke. That's what the young folks call it nowadays. When I was growing up, we used to call it being conscious. You a conscious brother. Now they call it being woke. The thing is, the way that whole saying, when all you are is a nail, everything looks like a hammer, the way that applies to this woke culture and is that it causes people that belong to this culture, this mindset, that share this ideology. What they do is they tend to have what I call a victim mentality. So I have a victor mentality, victory. a winning mentality. These people tend to have a victim mentality. They see everything in the world as being some huge force out to crush them. Every interaction they have with other people, they see it as being some power play where somebody with more power than them is out to harm them, and it leads to some pretty dark places. One of the things that it leads to is these groups are actually very violent. When you look at Antifa, for example, this is a hugely violent group because they think that this, like he said, this society is irredeemably racist and irredeemably sexist, and words are actually violence. So if you oppose what they're saying, they get to bust your skull in. And they call you Nazis. They say it's cool to punch a Nazi. The problem is a Nazi is anybody who doesn't agree with them. You know what I'm saying? Who doesn't believe what they believe. So one of the things that I want to talk about, getting into this whole thing about when all you are is a nail, everything looks like a hammer. I want to talk about, I guess first, well, what should I talk about first? I was going to talk about the women's national soccer team. I was going to talk about this article I read about housing and this event that I attended called by an organization called Girls Who Code. So, yeah, I think I'm going to read you some choice cuts out of this Wall Street Journal article. And then I'm going to talk about just some real life experience that I've had, and also the way you can tell that the person who wrote this article and the person who did the study that the article is based on, you can tell they share that woke philosophy because everything looks like a hammer to them. But there's no proof that there's any hammers out there, but everything looks like a hammer to them. So let me, without further ado, kind of touch on some of what's in this article. So this article, Black home ownership drops to all-time low, Wall Street Journal. It's by Laura Cusisto. And she says that while Hispanic home ownership rate is on the rise, the black home ownership rate has fallen 8.6 percentage points since its peak in 2004, hitting the lowest level on record in the first quarter of this year, according to census data. And she says that this divergence marks the first time in more than 2 decades that Hispanics and blacks, the two largest racial or ethnic minorities in the United States, are no longer following the same path when it comes to owning homes. Analysts say black communities have struggled to recover financially since the housing crisis, which has kept black home ownership out of reach. A decades-long legacy of housing segregation has also made would-be black buyers wary of returning to the market after losing their homes. How do we know that? Did she ask these people, these brothers and sisters that haven't returned to the home owning market, if they didn't come back because of segregation? It's probably because after the housing crisis, everybody's credit was ruined. People lost their homes in ways that damaged their credit, and it's difficult to recover from that. See how like she just assumes like, oh, is discrimination. There could be a more mundane explanation, right? So I'm gonna go on though. She says, well, we can see that the discrimination is still there, although it has changed its form, said Michaela Zonta. This is a person that she interviews, senior policy analyst at the Center for American Progress. This person named Michaela Zonta. Or Michela, I don't know how you pronounce it exactly. But it says a study by Ms. Zonta released Monday also found that higher income black homeowners are more likely to buy homes in heavily minority neighborhoods that have failed to benefit from the rise in home prices since the foreclosure crisis. Goes on to say that homes in neighborhoods with a high concentration of white borrowers on average have seen their homes appreciate 3% from 2006 through 2017, according to the study. However, homes in neighborhoods with a concentration of black borrowers on average are worth 6% less than they were in 2006. High-income black borrowers, get this, have concentrated in neighborhoods where the homes have lost 2% of their value, compared with white borrowers who have concentrated in neighborhoods where homes have appreciated 5%. Homes have appreciated 5%. Ms. Zonta says that the findings underscored a need to step up enforcement of the Fair Housing Act, which prevents mortgage brokers and realtors from steering clients to predominantly minority areas. You notice that there's absolutely no data for that, and that she fails to consider the most obvious explanation for that. Have you ever heard that old saying, birds of a feather flock together? That's natural. In other words, that people like to be around their own kind. So she says high income black home buyers tend to buy homes around other black homeowners. Birds of a feather tend to flock together. She says that right in the article. Yeah. She says right there, a study by Mrs. Zonta released Monday also found that higher income black homeowners are more likely to buy homes in heavily minority neighborhoods that have failed to benefit from the rise in home prices. There's no indication anywhere by anyone in this whole article or in the study, I'm sure, that says mortgage that real estate agents are steering black people to live around other black people. It's impossible, in other words, that these people consider the fact that maybe these black homeowners wanted to live in predominantly black neighborhoods because they felt more comfortable. You really think people are steering other people? That these realtors are steering these black people to only live around blacks and not go to the neighborhoods where white people live, where also just happen to be the neighborhoods where the home prices rose a little bit, slightly. She says, by the way, they rose like 5%. That's 5% since 2006. That doesn't strike me as being something that's a very big increase in the value of the homes. So then it could be, I don't know, but it doesn't read that way. But you notice how it just doesn't occur to her that maybe, just maybe, these black people wanted to live around other black people and they bought homes exactly where they wanted to buy them, in places where they felt comfortable and here's the thing, places that they could afford. So I don't know if you're a homeowner. We currently rent our house. And the reason we do that is because we're a former military family, just retired from the military not too long ago. And it didn't make any sense while we were active duty to own a home, which we discovered after we bought our first home back in 2004. So we bought our first house just before the housing market collapsed. And we were lucky to be able to actually get rid of our house, sell it, and not be underwater in any way. A little bit after the housing market collapse began. But that's because we PCS'd from Texas to Maryland. That's permanent change of station. That's when you move in the military, by the way. Now, I can talk from personal experience when I say that that housing crisis has far-reaching effects. And that's what this article is really about. It's about the far-reaching effects of the housing crisis. Like I said, when you lose your home like that, like many people did during the housing crisis, that's going to probably, more often than not, it's going to destroy your credit. So maybe these black homeowners are moving in or not returning to the market in droves since 2008 because they are still rebuilding their credit. Nobody ever considers that because they're too woke to consider the fact that maybe there's not these big forces out there oppressing people, evil white realtors, or maybe they're not actually steering black people to only live around other black people. Maybe there's less black participation in the home ownership market because they're recovering. Or maybe many black people are starting to realize it doesn't make sense to own a home anymore after the 2008 housing crisis, and they thought better of it. It's not, you know what I'm saying? There's no indication that there's any nefarious force, but yet this article just presumes that, it must be this is racism of some sort because America is such a racist, like the guy said from the article on Quillette, such a racist society, it can't be redeemed. No indication of that anywhere. But when all you feel like is a nail, everything looks like a hammer. So, like I was kind of talking about our personal home buying experience. In 2004, I was I think I was like a staff sergeant in the Air Force, mid-level rank leadership, entry to the beginning of the NCO Corps, which is the beginning of the leadership corps. So it's not very high ranking. It's actually middle range. Frontline management is what it is. So we were at that time fortunate enough to have been able to buy a house. We had a pretty decent credit at the time. We also had the first time home buyers loan that we were able to secure. And at the time, my realtor was a white gentleman. It was a cool cat. Christian white gentleman, pointed out that President Bush had signed that legislation to allow us to be able to get that first time home owners credit. It was basically the government was our co-signer, and we didn't even have to put anything down. In fact, the money that we put down, we actually got back at closing somehow. I don't even remember how that happened, but the whole amount that I put down, we got it back at closing. And I was like, okay, don't get me wrong. I wasn't going to argue with him, but you see what happened with that legislation that President Bush signed into order, into law or whatever. It actually backfired because it forced banks to give mortgages to people who may not have been worthy for those mortgages, to receive those mortgages credit-wise, otherwise. So in other words, it forced them to make loans because it said you need to go out and proactively make loans to underprivileged, underserved home buyers. Well, these were people, in other words, in plain English, who didn't have the credit score and the income to buy homes. And yet they still made loans to them, knowing that they really did not meet the criteria. And you see what happens later is that those very same home buyers who probably should not have had the loans that they did get eventually defaulted on those loans. And they also made them a bunch of weird loans where they variable interest rate loans and stuff like that. Now, I was savvy enough at the time, thank God, that I realized that, I don't want any kind of variable interest rate just because it can get a low monthly payment, but later on that interest rate can go up. And I said, no, And in fact, they didn't even try to give us one. But if they had, I would have been like, that's a no-go. Now, another thing, when we were buying our house at the time, the realtor that took me out, like I said, a Christian white gentleman and his Hispanic wife, San Antonio, Texas. So it's a heavily Hispanic population down there. This couple, nice couple, took us out, and my wife and I took us all. They asked us, where do we want to go look? And we told them, get this. We said, we kind of like this area over here, off Walsham. Anybody knows San Antonio, off of 35 and Walsham. And you know why we chose that area? Get this, because it had a lot of black homeowners living there. We chose an area where we felt comfortable because there were other people that looked like us living there. Imagine that. They said, okay, you know what they said? That's what their job was as realtors, is take us where we wanted to go. So they said, okay. And then when we got done looking around that neighborhood, we made a mistake, actually. They asked us straight up, do you guys want to look at anywhere else? Are you satisfied with this area? Don't you want to go check out this area? Maybe go out to the Northwest. By the way, in San Antonio, the great Northwest is heavily white. It's actually pretty mixed, but it's a lot of white families out there as well. And we were like, no, we kind of like this house. We're good. Now, that was a mistake. We should have gone to look. Why? Because I'll tell you later, plays right back into this article. We should have gone to look out there, but we didn't. We kind of found what we wanted, and we were like, yeah, let's move. So when we were getting a loan later, a few months down the road, the loan officer at Countrywide or wherever it was saying, Mr. Jenkins, I can easily triple this loan amount for you. And I was already scared to get that amount that I was getting, and much less 3 times that amount. That was a huge commitment. I was shaking in my boots a little bit. Like I was 28 years old or something like that. I was like, swallowed a lump down the throat. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't think I'm scared to get this amount. I don't want 3 times that amount. And she said, well, just so you know, we can easily do that. And that was part of that whole legislation that was passed, that first time home buyer, that whatever that was, the Fair Housing Act or whatever it was that President Bush passed. So again, God blessed me with enough sense to say, no, I don't want 3 times the amount. I don't want to get a house worth 3 times as much as the house that I'm buying now. I think this house is fine, and it's going to be comfortable for us to pay for. So that's what we did. We got that house. Now, about 5 years later, I ended up getting orders to PCS again, which, by the way, I hadn't received orders in 10 years. That's why we bought the house in the first place, because we looked like we were going to be there a while. Of course, that didn't work out. So I got orders to come out to Maryland. Before that, I had to go to California and do some language training. But when we moved, we were able to actually sell that house. And like I said, we didn't end up underwater. But I'm glad we moved when we did, because going back to this article, looking at that neighborhood, I guarantee you the housing costs in that neighborhood have fallen because it has not been kept up. The people that bought houses there didn't keep up their property, and it doesn't look good anymore. We went back about a year ago, and it looks, we're glad we got out of it. Our home would have definitely lost value just looking at the surrounding homes in that neighborhood. So going back to this article, nobody steered us toward these black area of town. We moved to that area of town because we were driving around looking on our own, and we realized, hey, this is a nice little black area over here. It's a lot of black folks. San Antonio doesn't have a huge black population, so we were happy to find some wealthy, affluent, regular looking black people. It seemed like they were on the same socio-economic level as us. So that's why we moved to that neighborhood. Nobody forced us. We're not nails, so we didn't feel like there was people trying to hammer us in, and you know what I'm saying? And I seriously doubt that happens anywhere. That does happen. It used to happen. I don't know how much it happens anymore. My dad told me when he bought his house in Lubbock, Texas, back in 1980, 79 or 80, the realtor didn't want to show him the white side of town. Yes, Lubbock actually still does have a white side of town and a black side of town. She wanted to show him stuff on the east side, which is the black side of town. He said, I don't want to see no houses on the east side. I want to see some houses on the west side. So she begrudgingly took him out there. And to this day, he still lives in that house. Now, that did happen then. So I do, acknowledge that, there is a problem. There has been a problem with this kind of, racist or prejudice attitudes on the behalf of individuals who didn't want black individuals to move out to certain neighborhoods. But those are individuals. I don't see that exists anymore, and my own personal experience has proven that it didn't exist at all. So, like I said, reading this article, she acts like there's these hammers everywhere trying to get black homeowners, and she never looks at the fact that maybe they chose to live in black neighborhoods, and the houses in those neighborhoods went down in value because maybe they didn't keep those houses up the way they should have. Maybe that the percentage of black home buyers is falling and home ownership is falling because black people are still struggling to recover from 2008. Because here's a secret, folks: the economy is still in terrible shape. Don't let President Trump and the news tell you that everything is good. No, it's not. We have never recovered from 2008. If you look at places like LouRockwell.com, this is one of the sites that I read, you can get a lot of insight from people who are right. You look at TV, MSNBC and all them cats, every time I turn around, they're saying something that turns out to be wrong later on down the road. Well, I look at analysts in whatever I'm interested in who have a track record of being right. And that's the cats on LouRockwell.com, ZeroHedge.com, other places like that. So anyway, that's kind of my take on whether or not there's some hammer influencing driving down the rates of black home ownership. I think there's a ton of other factors that aren't being considered. And I think so primarily because there's no evidence in the article that there is any hammers out there. And also my personal experience in the last 10 years or so is just the opposite. So the next thing I want to talking about this whole hammer and nail phenomenon, this whole, if you feel like a nail, everything looks like a hammer. I had I'll say the pleasure of attending a TED Talk type of event. Y'all are familiar with TED Talks. This is it really wasn't a TED Talk, but it was similar to that. Really, it was more like a discussion. This lady I think her name was Reshma Sojani. She has an organization called Girls Who Code, and she did a little presentation on talking about why she started this organization. And you can look it up, Girls Who Code, but basically the name says it all. It's an organization that they get former teachers, and they teach them how to code, and they have these teachers teach girls specifically how to code. And she said the reason, the author, she has a book, I think, New York Times bestselling book, and you can look on YouTube and check her out. Check out her TED Talk on the subject, Girls Who Code, and it's Reshma Sojani. Anyway, this was another example of in my opinion, of a woke individual not considering any other factors other than that there's some mysterious force oppressing girls into not being coders. Computer code, writing up computer code. And I think... So she starts it off and she says that she ran for office and she failed at that. She was not elected. And while she was doing that, she was trying to recover from that, and she decided what she wanted to do next. And she noticed while she was out, I guess, campaigning or whatever, that every time she would be at these schools, there would be a lot of boys, I guess, in the lines for computer classes and coding classes, but no girls. And so she said, I want to change that. And she said, we have to market coding differently because And she said this, like she said pretty much, this is a quote. She said, we don't market coding to girls properly because girls want to help people too. They might want to help their obese neighbor, or they might want to help their best friend who's been abused at school or on the internet, or they might want to they want to help people. But we don't. She said men, they sit in basements. The way we market coding is that there's some lonely guy sitting in the basement with the lights out in the dark drinking Red Bull coding, and he's not helping anybody. He's not doing anything. And so girls aren't being marketed to by that. They don't find it appealing, and they don't want to become coders because it's not marketed to them properly. I thought that was interesting. It's like, you mean to tell me that girls they need to be specifically marketed to before they know what they like or don't like or want to do and don't want to do? Could it possibly be that there aren't more girl coders because women don't want to code? Maybe only a small, compared to men, maybe only a small number of women want to code. Could that be it? She never considers that at all, apparently, because, she made this whole organization to help girls learn how to code. And I'm like, well, that's all well and good, but there may not be some force that needs to be changed. It could be the very nature of men and women. And I know it's unfashionable today to say that men and women have different natures. There are differences between men and women, but there are. And any level-headed adult knows this. It's kind of hard to dispute. If you noticed that you can look around and see in real life the difference between men and women. Well, look at the professions they choose. Very few women choose to be plumbers. Why? Because I suspect they don't want to be messing with dirty pipes and sewage water. I suspect they don't really find that as enjoyable. They don't find it a challenge to fix things mechanically. They don't find it as part of something that they desire to do to go into that type of field. Nobody's out there making an organization, Girls Who Plumb. Why not? Why aren't we making? Why isn't there an organization to get more female plumbers? Because it's not glamorous. It's not coding. Computer coding is real sexy nowadays. Everybody thinks it's all glamorous and cool. And not only that, but you make a lot of money doing it. So that, I'm sure, contributes to the it factor, or the desirability of being a computer coder. And so that's why they want to get more girls to do it, because it's cool and pays a lot. They never consider that maybe girls don't want to code. They never consider that for decades now, the social sciences have done tests on tens of thousands of individuals, men and women, and discovered that they have these 5. Jordan Peterson talks about this. If you haven't heard of Jordan Peterson, Google him, look at him on YouTube. He talks about this a lot. Men and women have different personality types, and those different personality types manifest themselves in different areas of work and things that we like to do. And women, not every single woman, nobody is saying every single woman is a certain way, but women overall tend to favor professions where they get to help people, which, by the way, you notice that's the way Reshma Saujani, the author of this book and the leader of this organization, Girls Who Code, that's one of the first things she said, is that girls want to help people, and coding doesn't seem like it helps people, which coding helps everybody. Think of the number of computer devices in your life. Somebody coded everything on every device. It takes a coder to make that stuff work. So of course, computers help people. Now I can see maybe you need to help girls understand that, but I think that even after you help girls understand it, they still would rather have a job or a profession that interfaces with people directly. That's what studies have shown for decades now. There's studies by female psychologists and psychiatrists and social workers and stuff, sociology people. People who study sociology people. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. These studies, time after time, show that women like to do things that help people directly, involve other people, and that directly involve face-to-face interaction with other people. On the other hand, it shows that these very same studies show that men, overall, not every single man, we're talking about averages here. On average, men prefer to deal with things rather than people. And because they prefer to deal with with things rather than people, you can see that's why men become plumbers, because they like tools and they like messing with stuff with their hands, and they like the challenge of fixing things, not fixing people. If you look at women, they like to fix people. They become sociologists, psychologists, teachers, nurses, that kind of thing. even doctors. I think medicine is becoming dominated by females. Nobody's saying that females aren't smart enough to do these jobs, but nobody is considering, do girls want to do these jobs? Do girls want to be coders? Do girls want to be firefighters? Do girls want to be plumbers, mechanics? All of these fields where they're underrepresented. I don't think there's these huge societal forces. This America is not so sexist that we're forcing girls not to be coders. It can't possibly be that maybe girls on average don't want to be coders. Maybe girls on average don't want to be plumbers. Maybe girls on average don't want to be heavy equipment operators. Why? Well, it probably has something to do with their personality type, which probably has something to do with their makeup as females opposed to males, which makes sense because why would God or nature, whoever you choose to believe in, why would they make two of the same thing if there was, why would they make men and women if there was no difference between them? Why would you make two of the same thing that don't serve any distinct purposes? That's a waste. We know that God doesn't waste things and nature doesn't waste things. Really, does it? Not in my understanding. They always say the fittest survives, right? That's economical as heck right there. There's no waste in that. And if that's the case, maybe men and women are different. Like, you have to say that nowadays. And maybe part of that difference stems from their brain. I was reading, I've read actually several articles and on the subject that women and men actually do have different brains, different types of brains. So it says men's brains, there's a part in the middle of your, you have the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere of the brain. There's a part in the middle, I think it's called the corpus callosum or something like that. And it basically connects both sides of the brain so that obviously so that they can communicate with each other, so that, the body can function properly. They said these researchers noticed that women have far more cross-hemisphere connections. So the right brain is far more connected to the left brain in women, which in a way seems to make my lay person's mind reach the conclusion that women are far more holistic than men. Which makes me go back to that coding thing, sitting down in the basement. Men tend to do that kind of stuff, sit in the dark, drinking Red Bull, focused, laser-like focus on a coding problem that they're coding. Might be because the brain ain't connected the way women's brain is connected, and we like to do this and only this. There's no holistic. There's less holism in the brain, in men's brains, perhaps. But the point is, there's differences between men's and women's brains. Obviously, there would be. I mean, why would nature or God or whoever you believe in design two things that don't have any differences between them? What's the point of that? Now, going back to this girl who code, though, at the point that I just made, if you look at the fields and professions where women dominate, they all center around helping people, which oddly enough is just what Reshma Soljani mentioned at the beginning of her talk, that girls overwhelmingly like to help people. So it really isn't surprising that they tend to be most represented in fields where they get to actually help people. Now, another thing that the author mentioned is that girls are raised with this thing where they have to be perfect. And she said that causes them to drop out of class because their research shows that when a girl does join a coding class in college, they go to class and then if they get a B, they drop out. They tend to drop out after making a B in the class. And I was like, well, and she said men, they don't worry about that. They get a B and they go, yeah, I got a B. And I was like, well, there's other explanations. It could be that a smart young lady goes to check out her coding class and she realizes she got to work really hard, and she worked really hard and she did pretty good. She got a B, but then she in her mind said, you know what, I worked pretty hard to get that B and it wasn't really fulfilling. I don't really like this. Maybe that's why she sees the level of effort that she has to give to get the B and realizes, this ain't for me. Personally, I'll tell you a personal anecdote, a story. When I was growing up, I used to think, fourth grade, I think it was, fourth and fifth grade, I used to think I wanted to be an aeronautical engineer. I wanted to design airplanes. I used to always make balsa wood airplanes and design them from scratch and build them out of paper and that kind of stuff. And they were cool things that flew well. Then I got to seventh grade and realized that me and algebra don't mix too well. And I kept going from seventh grade on through high school and realized that not only do I not mix well with algebra, I don't mix well with calculus, algebra 2, geometry, Matter of fact, I don't mix that well with higher math. Which, in case you not getting the point here, when you realize that you don't really have an affinity for higher math, you start realizing, you know what? I probably ain't gonna be no aeronautical engineer, because I think you need a little math to deal with that. A little bit of math. It's not quite rocket science, but it is airplane science. It's just like one notch below it. You know what I'm saying? No, it's actually the same thing, basically. But nobody stopped me from being an aeronautical engineer. I realized I had no aptitude for it, and that I could probably get a better grade in math if I just really went all out and concentrated and focused on it. But I wasn't really ready to do that. I didn't really want to put that much effort into it. I was more interested, actually, at that point, I started realizing I was more interested in history. Which, by the way, interestingly enough, one of the people at this event, Girls Who Code event, this talk that I was at, one of the audience members, during the question and answer period, said the same thing. She said, I have a question. They called on her, and she said, oddly enough, interestingly, full disclosure or whatever, I'm a girl who dropped out of computer science major, who dropped out of computer science. And she was about to make a comment, and the author, or the Reshma Soljani, said, wait, do you mind if I ask why you dropped out? And she said, I dropped out because it was hard. And she literally said, because it was hard. And the professor used to call me Miss instead of by my first name, like he called all the guys in the class. And none of the guys wanted to be on teams with me when we had to work together in partners and stuff like that. So that's clearly evil misogyny. The patriarchy. That's clearly what they call the patriarchy, trying to get her out of computer science. Or maybe it was a combination of the fact that, as she said, it was hard. She realized that she really didn't have that much aptitude for it. Because, by the way, in her question, she basically said, I dropped out. It was hard. The teacher used to call me Miss, so she felt singled out, and the guys didn't want to partner with her. And she said, I found my true love, which is being a librarian. So you really didn't like coding, and it was hard, probably because you really didn't like it. You tried it. And then also the guys in the class didn't want to team with you. It couldn't be that a bunch of nerdy, geeky guys who, are all up on computer codes and how to code and stuff like that. It couldn't be that they're uncomfortable around a pretty girl because they're nervous about women, and maybe they spend so much time coding they don't know how to talk to you and how to behave around you, and it was just pressure they didn't want to put up with because the class was already hard enough by itself. Couldn't have been anything like that. It had to be the patriarchy, right? It had to be evil men exerting pressure on you. Now, I'm sorry that happened, because it would be uncomfortable. I can see that. But nonetheless, it doesn't mean that they were evil or something. And to be fair, she didn't say it meant it was the patriarchy, but she just literally said they didn't want to be on teams with her. It also could be that they didn't want to be on the team with her because in groups with her, or whatever the case was, or work in pairs with her, because she wasn't a strong student. After all, she dropped out. And maybe they just looked at it and said, yo, she's struggling. This class is hard enough on its own. I don't have time. I don't have the additional intellectual resources to help her and get an A myself. So maybe they didn't want to join with her because I don't know. But it's a plausible explanation that has nothing to do with sexism, misogyny, and the patriarchy. But again, if you're a woke person, if you're woke with your eyes wide shut, I would say, you probably can't see any other explanations as to why girls don't get into coding, other than it's got to be the evil patriarchy, right? Evil men-dominated misogynists and all that stuff. I don't know. It could be, but I just remain unconvinced. Again, I don't have that victim mentality where I feel like a nail, so I feel like everything is a hammer out to get me. I got a victor mentality, not a victim mentality. I feel like I can do anything I put my mind to. I also feel like I'm a realist, and I realize that, hey, I probably can do that, like aeronautical engineering. I probably could have pushed it real hard and got through those math classes and done that, but honestly, I wasn't willing to put forth the effort. Couldn't be that this young lady that dropped out of computer science wasn't willing to put forth the effort. Or maybe girls in general realize, yeah, I probably could code, but it just don't seem that good to me. I don't want to put forth all that effort sitting around in a dark basement typing on a computer which is you're not going to be in a dark basement if you get a job doing that. You'll be in a cubicle in a well-lit office typing hard code all day, requiring immense concentration. Maybe they just don't feel like doing that. They don't want to do that. Nobody asked that question because they're too woke, I guess. There's a couple other points, though. I've talked about this particular part quite a bit, but there's a couple other points that I wanted to hit because during the question and answer period, there was also a guy who worked as a coder. I think he was an IT professional, and he stood up. And interesting thing about when he stood up, the first thing the author said to him was, a guy, your question better be good. So in other words, she teased him the same way they would have been mad at the professor for teasing that young lady, calling her miss. That's funny. Teasing you is showing you a sign of respect. I don't know. Maybe he was teasing her, but she teased that guy the same way. And she said, this better be good. No pressure, but this better be good. You gonna say? He's showing support for women who code just by coming, showing interest in the event. And that's how he gets greeted like that. Now, I looked at that as being just playful ribbing, but it was probably the same sort of playful ribbing that the professor who called that young lady might have been giving her when he called her miss instead of her first name. Anyway, the guy stood up and he was an IT professional. He said, people always approach me and say, oh, geez, man, you're IT and the computer science. Oh, man, I could never do that, man. It's hard. And my brain just doesn't work that way. And then he went on to ask his question, which I don't remember what the second part of his question was. But what struck me was that statement that he opened with was that he is an IT professional, and people, one presumes men and women, always come up to him and say, whoa, I could never do that. I could never be an IT because it's too hard, A, and B, my brain doesn't work like that. It's too hard and my brain doesn't work like that. In other words, it takes a very specialized type of person to work in IT, much less computer coding, messing with computer languages like, I don't know, A+ and not Joomla. What's that other one? Perl, all that kind of stuff. That takes a very special person to do that. It's not for everybody. And maybe it just so happens that it's not for girls, most girls, whereas there's a higher percentage of guys that do think it's for them. Nope, can't be that. There's got to be some hidden evil force where we don't market it to girls right, probably because we don't want them to be. No, really? Nobody ever considers normal explanations like maybe it's too hard and my brain just doesn't work like that. Yeah. So I guess that's enough. Again, that was just an interesting thing that happened to me recently where it showed that when all you are is a nail, when all you feel like is a nail, everything looks like a hammer. Now, the third thing I'm going to talk about was in the news quite a bit, and it was the women's soccer team. So the women's soccer team, I guess they won the World Cup. I'm not a soccer fan, so I don't really care. I'm not a sports fan at all, really. I played sports in high school. I liked it then, but I don't typically watch it too much now. But there was this big stink. The women's soccer team, they won the World Cup, but they were saying they don't get paid as much as men. Apparently, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer made the statement that he said, when you break it down, the women's national soccer team player earns a base salary of $3,600 per game, while a men's player makes $5,000 per game. And he went on further to say that discrimination is staring us in the face. These women who inspire our country with their poise, tenacity, skill, and excellence every time they take the field deserve to be fairly compensated. So again, there's that somebody is not fairly compensating these women. Who? It's funny because there's probably a lot of women officials in the women's soccer league. I don't know, but I'm just imagining there are. But he never considers that there's other reasons besides sexism and misogyny, besides these hammers out there hitting on the women's soccer team, keeping them driving into the ground under the heel of oppression. Maybe there's other reasons for their salary than these hammers out there, right? Well, turns out if you do any kind of digging on it, you realize the reason they don't get paid as much as men is because their sport doesn't earn as much overall as men's sports do. And maybe because now, and you can't blame like men for that, because if you really wanted the female soccer team, the women's soccer team, to earn more money, well, it seems like all women could just go to their soccer games, and that would bring up the amount of revenue they earn, which would bring up their pay. I want to go over some numbers here. And this comes This is off Forbes. This is an article off Forbes. And I've also got another article that I looked up on the I think it was the London Times, but this article on Forbes points out that the Men's World Cup in Russia generated $6 billion, and they gave out of that $6 billion. They gave $400 million to all of the teams, not the men's team, the U.S. men's team by itself, but to all of the teams, men's soccer teams. They gave them $400 million out of that $6 billion, which equals 7% cut of that $6 billion. Well, meanwhile, the Women's World Cup is expected to earn $131 million for the full 4-year cycle. From 2019 to 2022. And they are expected to make, out of that 131 million, they're going to pay all the women's teams about $30 million. Which, by the way, 30 million and 131 million, that's about 20 something percent. I already discussed I'm not that good at math, but 30 million out of 131 million, that's about 4 times. That's about 20 something percent. So the women are getting a 20% cut of the overall revenue that they make, that their sports make, while the men get a 7% cut. But they make $6 billion off the Men's World Cup. So that's why they make more per player, because they're getting 7% of $6 billion. And you know why? Because men tend to be, shocking, sports fans. You can't say there's no difference between men and women. We like sports too. Well, I thought you always wanted men to stop watching sports. You always, every time I turn around, you sitting on the couch watching the football game, because men like sports. I don't see why they like soccer personally, but they do. All over the world. In fact, most of the men in the world probably watch soccer, if they're going to watch a sport at all, because soccer is more popular all around the world than any other sport, football or whatever, cricket. That's another popular sport that I don't get. But you see the point? It's just plain math in this situation. The women actually get a higher cut of their total revenue. They get 20 something percent of that $131 million that women's soccer generates. The men get 7%, but they just generate more money. They generate $6 billion with a B dollars compared to 131 million. And they only get 7% of that. But 7% of 6 billion is far more than 131 million. You know what I'm saying? It's in fact, it's 400 million according to the article. So what's her name? Megan Rapinoe or something like that. I don't know the names, but she was up. They've filed lawsuits and stuff like why we don't get paid more. This is discrimination. No, man, you just don't make as much money as the men. Probably because men are sportsaholics all over the planet. A majority of men like sports of some sort, and they pay money to go see it. Women tend to like sports. You can't say that. Women. You can't say that. I guess, right? You can't say that there's differences between men and women, and one of those differences is men like sports. And by the way, one of the reasons men like sports is because almost all sports are some form of ritualized combat, and men like combat. We're built for combat. I think, you know what I'm saying? Football is nothing but a direct simulation of war. American football, not soccer. But soccer is too. You're driving the ball over your enemy's territory to score in their goal, which is to destroy their home base basically with a bomb. I mean, it's ritualized combat. Most sports are some form of ritualized combat. And men like to fight. We have testosterone. That's one of those things that makes us different than women. And because of that, we like to push ourselves physically. Combat is the ultimate contest of pushing yourself physically to overcome an opponent. But it's also bad because you die in it. So we ritualize it and turn it into sports. So you get to overcome the opponent and not die. And you get to overcome the opponent, not die, and make $6 billion in the case of men's soccer. Women don't typically fight in wars and don't typically present themselves as big, as combative physically as men, probably because they don't have this weird little chemical called testosterone that drives them to be that way. They have estrogen, which drives them to be more agreeable and less combative. And consequently, they may enjoy sports, which is ritualized combat, a little bit less than men do. which unfortunately translates to making less money. No hammers, no force, no misandry, no whatever you call it, misogyny, no evil forces dominating you and subjugating you and making you. No, it's just economics. So anyway, I hope that you found this some of these points that I made to be interesting or revealing. I don't know if they necessarily were, because to me they seem like common sense, but that's because I don't look at things through the lens of being a nail. I look at things through the lens of being a victor, not a victim. And I realize that, and see, that's the danger though. When you look at things through the lens of only being a nail, that somebody's always out to get you, it colors the way you see everything, and it makes you unable to see common sense, everyday explanations for events that everybody else can see except you. And you think of the world as this dangerous, evil place out to get you, when other people are looking at it saying, like, "What? Do we live in the same world, man? Are we looking at the same movie here? Because I didn't see that movie. What movie are you looking at?" So anyway, that's just that's kind of, I think that's all I want to say on that. But please feel free to chime in, leave some comments. Refute some points, add your own point, whatever the case is. This is all about freedom of expression, freedom of thought. This is the North Star Podcast. I want to thank you for tuning in, and I want to say peace and bid you 2 digits.